Hello and welcome once again. You're watching QTV and you're watching The Week in Review. I'm your host, Adi Darami, and my co-pilot is Mr. Mboj. Mr. Mboj, welcome to the program again.
Thanks, Adi. And
also welcome to new and old viewers. And in case you're tuning in for the first time, or even a regular viewer rather, this is how the show goes. We look at 10 big stories from the week and we go through them in some detail, analyze them. We've got stories about the Access to Information Bill, a hospital in Farafenni, which has got some very, very positive news, media's role in peaceful elections. So let's not hang about, let's get cracking. First story is to do with the Access to Information Bill. Much awaited, much anticipated, finally it is here. It is now law. Have a look.
This will strengthen our democracy because if you have access to information where public officials now don't fear to give out information, it calls for more transparency and accountability. So I think this is a step in the right direction by the government of the Gambia, by both the executive and the National Assembly, to ensure that our governance is more transparent and more accountable to the people that put them there.
There you saw and heard Mr. Njai, more accountable, more transparent. A good thing, surely?
Oh, absolutely. After 2 years, isn't it? I think it was tabled in 2019.
That's
so
right.
I suppose that's the average time that it takes for a bill, between tabling it and receiving the presidential assent. Absolutely, everybody's happy. He's been receiving praise from all quarters.
He has,
GPU,
because
everybody.
You and I have talked about the fact that when you're in opposition, as you famously once said, all you have to move your lips. And so politicians make promises when they're in opposition, and this is one of the promises he made, and he's delivered on it, and there's excitement. We talk now about transparency and the fact that we can hold people to account, but there's a whole network that has to be put in place to make this work. Do you see that? Do you see the kind of political will to make it happen?
Well, this is it. So this is just the first part.
Yes,
to have the law, that's the first part.
Sure.
The second part would be to create a freedom of information environment.
And a culture, yes.
A culture.
Yeah.
Ultimately, really democracy.
Yes.
It's a worldview. It's an attitude.
Yes,
in many ways, that's it. So we are not quite like that.
Yeah.
Here, government is secretive.
Yeah, a friend of mine, Desmond Davis, who was my colleague at West Africa magazine, we were discussing the whole secrecy. This was long years ago, in the 80s, in African politics particularly. And he said, we have the tradition of a minister asking you submit the questions before I will grant an interview. He said you turn up and you say to the minister, how are you feeling today? And the minister says, that wasn't amongst the agreed questions, which kind of summed it up for me. But you're right. So how do we build that culture, not just from government institutions, but also from the public and the media, to actually demand and expect to get, the information that we're seeking?
That is precisely it. So it's going to be another hard battle. I'm sure we'll be going to court a bit.
Sure.
Because in the end, this is what the powers that the Act will give us. When we demand a piece of information, of course, everybody understands that with some information there will be confidentiality,
Indeed.
secret stuff that we really cannot divulge because of security and stuff like that. Granted. But we also know that there are many other pieces of information that really public institutions should willingly share. Proactive disclosure.
It's remarkable, because one of the things that I was glad that was in the report that we did about it is the fact that amongst the things that you can demand is personal information about yourself that the government agencies hold. Like, okay, what information do they hold on me? Can you, and actually, and I don't want to encourage too much of this, but, when I worked on this similar sort of law in the United Kingdom, people would write in and said, I want every email where I am mentioned in that government department or government ministry X, and you had to provide it. And so this tells you about the keeping of information, that it has to be kept for a certain time and it has to be kept in a certain way, because guess what? A citizen actually can demand and has to be shown that.
Absolutely. I mean, information, that's what we need. They call it data. Information is the new oil. Because without that, I cannot make informed decisions. And after all, I put you there.
Yeah.
So you have to give account.
And
I'm the boss.
That's the crucial point, isn't it?
Yes.
That too much of what has happened in Africa in politics tends to be that we seem to elect people to rule over us rather than to serve us. But this is what is the game changer with an access to information. Okay, I've elected you, and you said you promised this, that, and the other. Have you delivered? Can I see the evidence? Can I see document X, Y, and Z?
Precisely.
Yeah.
And I used to remind people that actually the word minister comes from a word, Latin meaning servant. If you want to see the master, go to the courts, the magistrate. It comes from a word master. Yeah. So this is exactly it.
Yeah.
They'll be forced to. So sooner or later, we know that in the beginning it's going to be extremely difficult. Sure. We all know that to change attitudes, sure. That's really a long-term thing. So perhaps in the short term, we'll be taking them to court or the commission. There's a commission apparently.
That's right. Information commissioner.
Information commissioner.
With a 5-person commission.
Absolutely. Yes. And they can issue orders,
sure.
you know, for institutions to
yeah.
surrender information.
And information that if they fail to adequately explain why they have refused, there can be sanctions. Of course, there are exemptions and exceptions, national security, etc., sensitivity, and so on. And of course, I can't go and ask for information about you.
Absolutely.
And you can't ask for information about me, but I can ask for information about myself. And just to say that for Gambians, we're saying this is new, but when it came into being 2010 in England, the Freedom of Information Act, as it was, FOIA, as they called it for short, they were copying the Americans who had had it for many years before, and they were really the kind of front runners in this sort of culture of demanding from government, I want to see what information you have about me, about the taxes that I've paid, have they been adequately spent? And these are the kind of questions that we want people to ask. So to go on to the next point on this, is this something that we therefore need to teach in the schools, in the colleges, so that citizens expect it as a right?
Just as you've just explained there, that is really what strengthens their democracy.
Indeed.
Absolutely.
Indeed. Yes.
So they get the right information, then you can have the right debate, then you can influence the direction that the country is going.
Indeed.
Wherever people want to be secretive, they're not explaining to people what they're doing.
Yeah.
Well, if you're going wrong,
yes.
you know, who is there to rectify it?
Yes,
so it must be broad-based,
yeah.
you know. The conversation, everybody must be part of the conversation, and out of the arguments you'll see which one is the best as we move forward. Sure. So you increase your chances of perhaps getting the right policy if you include as many people as possible.
Sure. Behind my desk I used to have the words, information is king. And I think you just summed that up. And thank you, Mr. Mboj. So we welcome it. And we expect and we hope that, unlike many laws that have gathered dust on our shelves, this one will be implemented, and that we will see that it's implemented surely.
That's it. It will depend on whether we use it.
Sure, sure.
We have to use it. We have to test it. Sure. We know that we have to crack through a culture to erect a new one. Indeed. So this is going to be difficult. Sure. I'll probably be going to the commission a lot. Possibly they will have, the one would have the right to appeal to the High Court, as we tend to say. So all of these things. So, but it will take us time, but sooner or later it will become ingrained.
Let us hope so. Thank you, Mr. Mboj. And as Mr. Mboj says, let us hope it will become ingrained, because really we do need to see how the people we elect actually spend our money and whether they really are serving in our interest. So I certainly welcome it, and it seems as if almost everyone else does. Thank you. And now on to something else. We're used to giving reports on QTV News about, you know, hospitals and what, you know, how well or how badly they're doing. And a lot of times it's been kind of doom and gloom. But every now and then there's a kind of burst of light, something that gives you a sense of optimism and say, this is something that we could look forward to in the future. We went to Farafenni, and here's a report from the hospital there. Have a look.
Despite the outcry over the increase in reported maternal mortality, officials say the hospital recorded only a single maternal mortality this year between January to the time of our visit. This achievement could not have been possible without a team of dedicated midwives. Binta Danso, a graduate of the School of Nursing and Midwifery, described working in a maternal ward at a busy hospital like Farafenni.
It's not easy. and we hear from the media's Gambian Lives Matter. I think they should also fall back to the health facilities to go in and find. And we're grateful for you people, grateful to you guys who come out to find out what is really going on, not only in the combos, but also in the peripheries.
There you heard a midwife there saying, grateful to you guys, meaning you guys meaning the media. Mr. Mboj, we're grateful to them, the midwives and all of those who work. But the reason we did this story and we particularly liked it was they mentioned that a single death in that period. In a similar period in the previous year, I think they'd had something like 19 deaths, maternal mortality there. So quite a dramatic turnaround and something to be applauded.
Absolutely, and even when you put it in the wider context, the last report I read about maternal mortality in this country was what, 1,050 per 100,000, apparently among the highest in the world, in Africa. Sure. So to have this Farafenni hospital, serving the North Bank, isn't it?
That's right.
The population of about, what, 221,000, something like that.
And they have people visiting from outside the Gambia, in fact.
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah.
So obviously to be applauded all year until now on the single maternal death.
Yeah, indeed. And one of the reasons we wanted to show the story was that we want people to see it from other hospitals, go there and say, because you can talk about these things, but to show it and hear the people involved speaking about it, we thought that would inspire people who run other hospitals to say, let's go and talk to them and see how they did it. How have they managed to turn things around? And really, that's what we should be doing as the media.
Absolutely. I mean, that's it. It's good to show that, just as the other day we showed the Bakau market as well, and stuff like that. Hopefully, positive stories. But this is it. I mean, with dedication, yes, we hear a lot about we don't have resources, the shortcomings, the inadequacies, we know about all of that. Sure. But whenever you have a dedicated, really leadership, and I think here it will take leadership, because really that normally directs and drives change and stuff like that. Yeah. With leadership, I think with the little that you have, you can make a difference.
And that's interesting, because in the hospital administrator in that particular story actually mentioned that they deliberately changed around their policies, and they made sure that they requested many of the things that they needed that they were having problems getting, including drugs. And now they showed the sort of hospital pharmacy. It was packed with drugs, the right drugs that they need. And that's the kind of thing that can make all the difference. The right hospital administration can actually make the sort of dramatic turnaround that we've seen in this particular story.
Big time. I mean, most analysts, when we look at our situation, the fundamental problem we have is that organizational acumen.
Yeah, sure.
That is really where the key is. Often, especially within public bodies, you all know that they're not properly organized. The monitoring isn't going the way it is, and stuff like that. Sure. That's it. But when you have a serious and dedicated leadership, one sees the difference.
Sure. Indeed. Thank you for that. So to Farafenni Hospital, we say once again, congratulations on the dramatic turnaround you've achieved. And as we also say, we hope other hospitals will rush to your door and say, how did you do it? So thank you for that. Now to something else. I didn't want this one to follow the first story, which was about the Access to Information Bill, which the media had been screaming for. But the media has an important role to play in any democracy, and certainly at a time of elections. We've seen how the dark side of the media, what happened in Rwanda, where the media was used to actually encourage people to go and kill fellow citizens. So recently there was an event where journalists were brought and trained on reporting and their role in holding peaceful elections. Have a look.
The media should bear in mind that we have to do it through impartiality and following the ethics. We have the Cherno-Jalo Code of Ethics. I will urge all of you to engage the GPU, the Gambia Press Union, and have the Cherno-Jalo Code of Ethics, which is the latest code of ethics. It has election reporting. Please use it as a guiding tool.
Now, the Code of Ethics, it's you don't have to pay for it. I think you could even download it online. But as I said there, we want people to read it, digest it, and as he says, it has a role in, it has a section on reporting during elections. So I've used this phrase till people are bored of hearing me say it. We live in a country that is just getting used to the notion of a multi-party democracy. For the media, surely the role is crucial in making sure that this becomes embedded.
Oh, absolutely. There's no denying that. Everybody knows that. I think the problem comes in now. Yes, we've got our ethics and that sort of thing. It's always in the application.
Sure, indeed.
Yes, that's where the problem is, always in the application. Somehow, if you're really not careful, all sorts of extraneous sort of influences begin to come into it, how you interpret. It will always be difficult. And then even yesterday, I heard you were Troy, can I lampoon somebody?
Indeed, indeed.
You know what I mean?
I mentioned to him that Africa is one of the few continents that still has laws saying you can't make fun of the president. There's somebody in jail now in Uganda, I beg your pardon. And his crime was that he made fun of President Museveni. And Museveni was saying, yes, the law says you can't make fun of me, but come on, why not?
That's it. And in the papers, we're used to having satirists.
Yes, indeed.
Can I satirize?
This, can I write, draw a cartoon that makes fun of a particular figure? Can I distort your image to make you look a clown? And people were saying it's insulting because it was done recently with one government official. But in terms of peaceful elections and the role of the media, Gambia elections in December, they're crucial. I mean, I said, obviously, I think since the 2016, which everybody said was, most important in the country's history, this one is equally important, surely.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, 2016, that was a coalition.
Sure.
We had a special problem called Babili Mansa.
Quite.
So this is still the first time we are testing, post-Jammeh, presidential elections. Sure. It is very, very significant. And President Barra came in as a coalition candidate. Yeah. So now he's got his own party,
Indeed.
NPP. So they'll be testing their sinews.
Right. Yeah.
So yes, it is significant on all levels.
Sure.
So, but see, this is the key. If I want pluralism in the media, then I, as a citizen, must be tolerant.
Yes. Indeed.
They will write stuff.
There'll be divergent views.
Yeah, there'll be divergent views.
So,
And I think the journalist, whatever he's going to write, if we're going to satirize, I satirize. If I'm going to lampoon, I lampoon. Yeah. So the key, the secret is to a citizenry that's tolerant of divergent views.
That's right.
That can take a joke.
Yeah. And the media has a role to explain to the public that actually that person is right not only to have divergent views to the ones you hold, but they can even make fun of you and your views in the press, and you have a right of response in many cases, or you can reply. But you shouldn't take offense and say it must stop because I don't like it because it's making fun of me.
Yes, it seems we take offense too quickly. And there's a lot of self-righteousness.
Sure.
In
That's right.
And the sort of inflated egos.
Yeah.
So there are all sorts of factors.
Sure.
This cocktail of factors that make us sort of intolerant of divergent views.
But it's part of the reason why there's been, because as far as I can remember, over the last 4 or 5 weeks, there have been several of these sort of training sessions and seminars. Is part of that because of the fact that people have tried to kind of narrow politics down to tribal and ethnic, sort of differences and so on. You hear people talk about, people trying to, take tribalism out of it. And is it because they're saying to the media, look, it's your role not to play along with that, and when you see it, to actually attack it, address it, and comment on it, not just let it go?
Absolutely, yes. We know that. But you also realize that the media, we reflect society out there.
we come from. Yeah.
That's it. For me, then people who want to move away from that, the advocates of equality, not based on tribe, we must just keep on talking.
Sure.
This is what pluralism means.
Yes, quite.
You have a multiplicity of voices.
Quite.
I don't want a homogenized, you know, sort of kind of homogeneous media. It defeats the purpose.
Absolutely.
So this is it. Yes, the media, we will always think about notions of objectivity, of telling the truth. But we all know that with language, you see, when you use language, these things can be really very, very tricky.
Indeed.
So the secret is the readers,
Sure.
the people, we must be tolerant.
Yeah.
We've got our laws, be it libel or slander and stuff like that. You know, if a newspaper or media or reporter goes overboard,
Sure.
you can have recourse to the law.
Absolutely.
But apart from that, you must be tolerant of divergent views. Sometimes people will make fun of you. Sorry, but this is what it is. We have to be mature and just move on. Get on with it.
Like I said, we're still getting used to being a democracy. Thank you for that, Mr. Mboj. And now onto a completely different matter, and this is to do with the Paralympics, which are still going on as we speak. Gambia has a couple of athletes representing us. Have a look.
Athletes Malan Tamba and Fatou Sane are the two Gambians competing at the event. Both athletes will compete in the wheelchair racing. Gambia made its Paralympic debut in London 2012 before a second appearance in the Rio Paralympics in 2016. Two athletes have represented the West African nation in both events. Tokyo 2020 will be the biggest Paralympic Games ever, with a record number of athletes set to take part.
Record number of athletes set to take part, Mr. Mboj, but for the Gambia, only two. And for me, I think the thing is that there'll be no spectators yet again, which seems a shame because spectators have returned to football. But of course, Japan is having its own problems, isn't it, with the rise in COVID cases?
Absolutely, and you know, in sports, it's not quite the same without the spectators.
It's not, is it?
No, at all. You need that buzz.
You need the buzz, but having said that, we saw many records broken in the Olympics.
In the Summer Olympics,
with no
yes.
spectators.
Absolutely, some of them were saying that it was the track. The track it was a fast track somehow. So that's it. But at least they've managed to stage it.
Sure, yeah.
It's been an unusual year or 2 years, really, and so therefore.
Yeah, I mean, our two athletes are in wheelchair sprints.
Yes.
But there are other sports that are taking place: wheelchair basketball, wheelchair tennis, and so on. And one of the reasons I wanted us to kind of focus on this story is that what more should we do to encourage particularly Paralympic sport in the country? Because if you go to the United Kingdom, this has given as much prominence as the Olympics. It's not shunted away in a corner somewhere. It gets equal TV time as the Olympics. But I don't see that happening, not just in Gambia, but in Africa.
Absolutely, and even in Gambia, some will tell you that even with the able-bodied, as it says, isn't much being done. Sure. So this is it. It seems we've not been really investing that much into sports. Sure. And with the Paralympics, I'm sure it was really never prioritized.
Well, that's right, because
how things are.
Sometimes you have to modify facilities, and sometimes, let's be blunt, we don't have these facilities. But would you like to see, we just had a disability bill recently, but would you like to see that kind of, look, we always say there's no money for this, that or the other, but just in terms of the dignity that comes from, you know, making people aware that yes, we care about you and your condition.
Absolutely, and we would love to see sort of government give them these organizations, as it were, subventions, so that they could be investing in these things, and not just government, and even private sector as well, philanthropies, so we can have a pretty good structure in place where we can be funding these things. It just takes a matter of one person or a group thinking about it, dedicating themselves to it, for it to happen in many ways, really.
Okay, thanks. So to Malang Tamba and Fatou Sane, our two athletes, in the 100 and 200 meter wheelchair. All I will say is that you saw what happened with the Olympic athletes when they came back. So break your national records, do your best is all we ask. Thank you for that, Mr. Mboj. And now on to our fifth story. This one is about infrastructural development, something that's been sorely needed, but there are signs that various bits are taking place across the country. How are people reacting to this? Let's go to Basse and find out. Have a look.
Sambufati and Mamadou Jallo, both commuters, hailed the government for the foresight and the unprecedented development that transpired in URR.
Every ngabo wuli kana jankatinya jawuraro kata ngaminjo ngolalo. So ngoni birjoni tarafadu ko dafa apareta.
Mi do nana inde brijong, mi do pati brijong kono mi arale. Hande no mi tayo mi ar mi ndara de do golle moƴƴe.
We thank Allah for this development. Every day I come to Basse from Wuli. Previously, I spent a lot of money to cross over to the other bank. But now that is a thing of the past. If the going and coming is easy, that alone is a big development. In those days, the condition of our roads were terrible, but now they are constructed and connected to this very important bridge. I believe with the advent of this development, all the places are now one and the same.
I love that commuter saying, with this development, all the places are now one and the same. Mr. Mboj, we might not spend too long discussing this because I think we all agree this is the kind of development, this is the kind of infrastructural project that the Gambia has sorely needed and seems to be happening now.
Yes, building bridges.
Literally.
Even and metaphorically, you need both.
Between communities and across
communities. Across communities.
Quite.
Of course, I mean, you've got to start somewhere.
Indeed, yes.
You know what I mean? This is just part of, or should be part of, larger package.
Kind of wider thing, yeah.
Wider thing. So obviously, so anybody will applaud this.
As somebody who's traveled around the country, I mean, are there sort of places that you visited and thought, you know, this is somewhere that needs something, some kind of infrastructural improvement, some sort of development, like the bridge in Basse? People have said how it's a life changer. And we had one imam saying that, you know, people are now buying land close to the bridge, whereas before that area was completely ignored by people.
Absolutely.
This is the kind of thing that can happen.
These businesses are coming, yes. And in fact, one of the other people that we interviewed, one of them said, I mean, there used to be a nightmare if you had to transport people by canoe or stuff like that, especially when they are sick in the middle of the night.
That's right.
So practical terms, it will make a lot of difference to people living there.
Yeah, so as we say, practical difference in people's lives. This is the kind of development we want to see. At this point, we'll take a quick commercial break, and when we come back, we'll have 5 more stories. So don't go away. Join us after the break.
The best product in town is back. QCell's MiFi router. Get the best MiFi in the country for just $2,800 and connect up to 15 users with 4G internet speeds and a long-lasting battery life. So rush now to any of our customer care locations and get the best for less while stocks last. For more info, call our customer care on 111. QCell, Senior Boss, the Gambia's quality network. We innovate, others follow.
Welcome back after that break. You're watching QTV and you're watching the Week in Review with me, Adi Darami, and my co-pilot, Mohamed Mboj. So Mboj, thank you for your interventions and interjections, as I always say. We've had 5 stories so far, and we've got 5 more to go. Now, the next one I chose with a bit of a twinkle in my eye, because I remember going on one of these when I was a little boy. Yes, I was once a little boy, in Sierra Leone. Have a look.
But there are also others who use small canoes to cross. When we boarded the ferry, we started pulling the rope and the ferry started moving. This we continued doing until we got to the other side of the riverbank. The exercise is laborious, demanding, time-consuming, but fun for travelers, especially the children and first-timers like myself. As infrastructural development by the government, like the construction of roads and bridges, increase across the country, and once the regular ferry is repaired and back in operation, will this signal the end of the manual ferry, or will it be maintained and preserved for posterity for the future generations?
I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, I know why he chose this story to follow the one that came just before the break. Mr. Mboj, as I said, I will not hide my glee that as a child I crossed in various rivers in Sierra Leone on exactly that kind of ferry. And our colleague Omar P. makes a point there. We talked about the progress that can come with the sort of bridge building that we're talking about, connecting communities. But are you like me, one who will miss the romance of of the hand-pulled ferry?
Absolutely, DIY crossing. I call it.
And spot on, yes.
Yeah, quite quaint. Yeah, there's some romance to it. It just depends on how you look at it. For others, you know, just as he said, it was laborious. that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And yes, and if you're an old man, it will be quite difficult.
It will be quite
difficult. Exhaustion.
I mean, when I discussed it with Omar P. Jallo, and he made that point, and we were discussing it in the office, and I said, if this was in England, yes, they'd have the bridge across the river, but I bet you somebody would say, for those who are pleasure seekers, who want a more gentle crossing, I will start hiring this out just so you get involved in the fun of pulling it.
Absolutely.
Do you see that as a possible prospect to save some of these? I would really hate to see them go.
Absolutely, but there people are doing it for pleasure.
Yes.
Here, I think it's out of necessity, because of the ferry.
The ferry was being repaired.
The ferry being repaired.
And so this was the kind of temporary measure. And so they stepped in with this, and I don't think anybody was complaining, because, as he said, particularly the children, they seem to be having fun with it.
Absolutely. That is like a playground.
Yeah, quite.
For kids.
Yeah, so as I say, I, for one, will certainly miss those when they go, because I used to really enjoy being on them and pulling along. Not that I think my pulling did much, but I thought it was. Thank you for that, Mr. Mboj. Now on to something else. Over the years across Africa and certainly parts of Asia, malaria carried by the Anopheles mosquito has been something that has caused a lot of death and sickness. In the capital, Banjul, every year they try and do something about it. Something like what, I hear you say? Have a look.
We wish to use this opportunity to emphasize the need for collaboration between government entities, and all other stakeholders, as is manifested here today between the Ministry of Health, the Public Health Directorate of the Ministry of Health, the Malaria Control Program of the Ministry of Health, and the Banjul City Council.
The Deputy Mayor, Honorable Omar Toure, says this mass mosquito fumigation exercise couldn't be timelier. He called on the people of Banjul to support the initiative and revealed that 25 spraying tanks and 3 fogging machines will be used during the exercise.
Dulcet tones there of our colleague Ansumana Esonyasi. Malaria, quite a scourge. Are you of the generation that remembers people going around and spraying?
Absolutely.
And they seem to have modernized it now with these fogging machines that go on. But generally, what are your thoughts on the fact that we're still using this sort of methods for kind of malaria control?
Yeah, absolutely, yes, as you said, yeah, from when I was a kid, it was regular.
Yeah.
More regular, I don't know, maybe once a month or 2 weeks, but it was quite regular.
Yes.
To see them from what we used to call, I think, Board of Health.
I can almost still recall the smell as we speak.
Absolutely. So spraying all over the place. Sure. Yes, it appears for now we have to use these for now, and of course these things must be complemented or supplemented by other things as well.
Which was the point I was going to come to. In order to complement them, we need, because what I'm fearful of is that we sort of relax and say, oh, well, we'll just use the fogging machines. But, clean environment is what starves mosquitoes of their breeding grounds. And that, should we be teaching that? Are they still teaching that in schools? as far as you're aware?
I'm not sure about that.
Yeah.
But one would imagine that they do.
Right.
Otherwise, what's the point of school?
Yeah, because I remember in the 60s in Sierra Leone, it was drummed into our heads about, stagnant pools of water, breeding grounds for mosquito. Try and avoid these if you can. But I'm curious, generally.
When you do health science, that sort of thing that must be studied, of course you will do stuff like that. But perhaps, as you said, the idea is from even kindergarten. Starting to teach them about hygiene and cleanliness and stuff like that. One imagines that they possibly do. But perhaps then when you go home as well, how we are like at home, so possibly home would undermine what is being taught at school. So people here, we just throw things anywhere. You see these attitudes. So this is it. So you must have school and home really coordinating. But when you put in here one way and the other, it sort of neutralizes it.
I was explaining to somebody because we got into an argument because he threw away a Coke can. And he said, what's the big deal? I said, well, if that can lands this way up with the open bit, rainwater gathers in there, and it becomes stagnant. I said, do you know how many mosquitoes would breed in that?
Absolutely.
And they'll come and bite you and give you malaria.
Absolutely.
So it's not just that it's ugly for the thing, but it's also for your own health.
Yes.
And so should we be doing more? Because I have to be honest, I see a lot of this, of people discarding stuff, and we've done stories on here before about, illegal dumping and so on. But should we be doing more, sort of on the radio, on TV, in the media, about why we should not be doing this sort of thing?
Absolutely, and even when we see somebody does that, I mean, a member of the public must accost him, maybe not accost, but at least engage you, tell you that you shouldn't do that.
Sure.
Perhaps we should be more proactive as citizens, you know what I mean? Because we see it all the time.
I upset the manager of a restaurant not far from here, because I went there. I'd been walking past there to the bank for about a week or so, and I saw this stagnant pool right by where he actually had tables laid out, and I said, don't you think you should do something about clearing that so that the water can flow? I said, because the fact that it's sitting there stagnant. I said, look at it now, you can see insects dancing on the top of it. And he said, okay, we'll do something about it. But of course I went back 2 days later and he had done nothing about it. And so this is somebody who, it's for the benefit of himself and his customers, and for the environment and society. And yet they did nothing.
Yes, so it's a tough battle, not even shaming. Shaming them would change that. Yes, it will take a huge battle, involving combination of work, awareness, raising awareness, that will be part of it. And there should be sanctions. I think it helps to keep order. There must be some kind of sanctions. It's just that now people just get away with it. There are no sanctions. That's the problem. So the awareness raising on its own, I don't think it will do it.
No, it won't. And I have to say that I did get into it wasn't a discussion, it was an argument with this chap, because I said, I will tell anybody I know not to eat at your restaurant. And he didn't like that, but I meant it. Thank you, Mr. Mboch. Now on to something else, which again is dear to my heart and discussing, because I think it's a serious topic that I still say we do not take seriously enough in this country. You think, oh my gosh, what's he talking about now? When you see this, I hope you'll agree with me. Have a look.
The Gambia is ranked 4th in the 2018 World Road Traffic Accident Index, which should be a cause for concern with our population of just over 2 million. The number is on the increase according to recent published data by the country's leading sergeant at the Edward Francis Small Teaching Hospital, Dr. Keba Marina. Dr. Marina released his own data on the number of road traffic accident victims he attended to.
Over 800 injuries over a period of 9 months, 800 people who came with injuries. And at least 70 to 80% of those injuries are what we call serious injuries. And they had to be admitted, they had a fracture, or they had some kind of injury that will leave them with a lasting scar or a lasting problem. And as I say, the numbers of those who are dying was over 14 every month over the period of the last 9 months.
Dr. Mariner there of Edward Francis Moore Teaching Hospital. We follow each other, he and I, on Twitter. And I became aware of the fact that he publishes his own figures on the shocking statistics. And he does it on a weekly basis, I believe. And actually reading the statistics for just one hospital is enough to jolt you into thinking, my gosh, this is just one hospital. And I said in the lead up to that, this is something we don't appear to take very seriously. And, you know, those who know, I've written a couple of articles about this, about the poor sort of driving conditions and manner in the Gambia. And just the day before this program, on my way to work, there was a shocking accident involving 3 vehicles. If anybody survived from those 3 vehicles, I would be shocked. That's how serious it was. And the weather was bad, it was raining, and yet people were going at top speed. Mr. Mboj, why?
Absolutely.
Why do we not change?
It is an epidemic.
It really is.
in many ways.
Really
so this is it. I mean, and you don't get the sense that the authorities involved, the authorities whose responsibility it is, you know, with road traffic and safety and the like. One doesn't get the sense that they see it as an emergency.
But do you see drivers taking personal responsibility? The fact that people think if they don't overtake you, they're a wimp. It's like, you know, oh, you're driving at 70, I must do 90 and go past you. I get that every time I'm driving.
that is very true. And yes, that conversation, that people changing their attitudes and all of that, one understands that. But again, you realize that we're in a situation where, as we've said, the public space, civil society is not very civil for some reason. The public space has sort of degraded in many ways. I mean, the last time, you know, I think we talked about it when I said to you, I think it was Professor Abdullah Sen's piece, that report, that he touched on the social degradation, as it were, the decline of respect and civility that was really part of the consequence, if you like, of the 22 years of dictatorship and the rudeness. Society actually degraded. So until we turn that around, we really need the authorities to enforce things.
This is true. And I said again, as I always say on this program, whenever we have these things, a discussion develops in the office. And I was saying to them that if we go on the statistic that we heard at the beginning of that report, it was up to 2019, Gambia was ranked 4th in the world. If you went back to 2017, the Gambia was number 8 in the world. And I said to them, if you extrapolate that more and more cars are coming into the country, more and more cars that are unfit to be on the road, let's be blunt. If you extrapolate forward, in 2 or 3 years' time, the Gambia would actually be number 1 in the world. A country of just over 2.whatever million.
Absolutely.
For road traffic accidents and fatalities.
If we do not do anything about it.
If we don't do anything about it. And so the anything about it, I don't get the sense when I read through the newspapers that I see convictions for reckless driving leading to death. I should be seeing many more of those given the number of deaths. But I don't see that. Is it that our media are not reporting it, or is it that the convictions are not taking place? What is it?
My suspicion is that there are very few, I think, convictions in many ways. You know, the way we are like, when an accident happens, possibly the parents or the elders or whatever will go to the 2 parties, will sort of try to negotiate, or absolutely behind the scenes, and will possibly ask the police or the prosecuting authorities to drop it. Then we begin to say things like, that was God's will. So socially, there are all sorts of norms that sort of kind of undermine the justice process.
Sure. I mean, you know, in various countries you have, you know, initiatives like kill your speed, not a child, kill a speed, not yourself. And in Jamaica, my cousin once took a shot of a road sign at a place that was quite a notorious spot for accidents. And the sign simply said, undertakers love overtakers. And it was essentially telling people, like, actually the person you kill might be yourself, and of course even more likely someone else. Kill your speed. Do we need more of that? In England, they've curbed it by having cameras everywhere. But of course, you need electricity for that, so let's not even go there. But you talk about the authorities. Should it be a combination of more enforcement by the authorities and more the kind of, you said, civil space is no longer civil? Is it a combination of both that will lead to the change that needs to happen?
Absolutely. We're going to have to work on that, and I think, you know, we do talk about it all the time, so that conversation is going on. But again, with the authorities, they must realize that there are certain crimes, it is against the state. So never mind what the families want. It is against the state. The state prosecutes. So once you have that, it will contribute its own quota of deterrence, I think. It helps. It goes along with other things as well, obviously, but it helps to say that these crimes, that's against the state, and then we're going to prosecute.
And just to carry on the discussion that went on, I said in the office, I said, if people were prosecuted as the way I would expect them to, I would comfortably expect double the number of people to be behind bars that there currently are, just because of the sheer number of accidents. There's no way you could drive anywhere in the greater Banjul area in a week and not see a minimum of 2 or 3 accidents. You might not be there at the time, but you might come across it just after it happened, or as tends to happen overnight, I drive home, there were no cars wrecked on the road, and then in the morning coming to work, I see 2 cars that obviously had collided with each other. And if people were prosecuted, our prisons will be full to overflowing. We need to get serious about this.
I mean, absolutely. You just need to just use traffic, or just stand there and watch. Sometimes I'll stop at an intersection and just look, and I say to myself, do they actually know what the regulations are? Do they actually know the rules? Sometimes I'm really baffled by the chaos. I don't understand it. And then the impatience as well, that also causes some of these accidents. Many of them. So you have a whole combination of things here that causes it, and it seems we really do not know where to start. I mean, as they say, a sound public policy that you enforce, that might work, but to expect a sort of dramatic increase in people's virtue, that's just a fantasy. It doesn't work like that. So there must be a proper structure in place, and then we enforce what we need to enforce. Both the authorities and us, ordinary people, you know, we can be telling people off when they do the right thing, or when they do the wrong thing, stuff like that. So it takes a village, it takes everybody to make the society work. But at this point, I think that we need state authorities, institutions, a bit more, because we have a lot of work to do within the society, and that sort of thing takes a bit more time, you know, to stop this chaos.
And time is what we don't have.
Time is what we don't have.
Yeah, sure. Thanks for that, Mr. Borge. And now on to our penultimate story. This one is to do with slave trade remembrance. Remembrance, you say? Yes. Have a look.
It was this, greed, brought about by mercantile capitalism, which led to the Atlantic, slave trade. Now, what made it strong was that there was so much profit in it. They came to Africa to exchange human beings for, items like a mirror. Like you give the African chief a mirror, the African chief will give them 5 strong men.
Evidently, our very own institutions, led by traditional rulers, champion the trade against their own subjects, playing a fundamental role in cooperating with European slavers. As a lucrative business, the transatlantic slave trade became a competitive and booming industry, serving as an engine for economic growth for Europe and the Americas.
A vile trade that went on for 400 years, Mr. Mboj. There are reasons why we need to remember, surely.
Yes. Yes, because apparently there's a hope that when you know your history, when you understand the issues involved, then maybe we may not do it again.
Indeed, yes.
Granted. But again, in today's world, I was just reading one report, some 40 million or so people around the world are still slaves.
Yes.
And even close to Gambia, our neighbor, operated a report in Mauritania. There's some kind of form of slavery going on there. So
yes, it's
when we remember, I hope that can push us into action to take care of.
And I'm glad you made the point, because this one is about mainly the sort of, it's based around the kind of transatlantic slave trade, but it didn't end there. I mean, I shocked some people by sending them a report about a slave revolt in Sierra Leone in 1906. And they said, but slavery had been abolished for, I said, yes, but not in Sierra Leone. The transatlantic one had been abolished, but not just in Sierra Leone, in many African countries. Mauritania, just around the corner from us, it's still going on there.
Absolutely. It was the Brits, they abolished in 1807.
1807.
So then a lot of societies around the world, it was really around 1900s.
Brazil was the last of the big ones, and that was in 1898. You know, so that was on the cusp of the 20th century that it was abolished in Brazil. So, but it left a legacy and a mark, because in a lot of European countries, they see Africa through the prism of both their kind of slave trading history and the colonialism which was only slightly better, that came after it, and that has impacted these African countries, including the Gambia, Sierra Leone, and other former British colonies. Surely.
Absolutely, colonialism, racism. I mean, it still reverberates. Even in Britain recently, remember the statues of slave owners. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So we continue to feel, as it were, the effects of it, and it will continue. I do not know for how long, but for me, as I said, I like commemorations and remembrances and all of that. But with this one, I'm a bit ambivalent. I'm not sure why I want to remember my shame, if you know what I mean. So I do feel that in me. I really do not want to remember it. And I remember somebody once saying that, you see, when I talk about slavery, it seems like I'm flattering them. You know what I mean? So there's a certain part of me that really, I don't want to deal with it. I just want to move forward.
Yes.
And I think for us, I mean, the best way to come back, we talk about reparations and all of that.
Sure.
But really, the best way to fight back is for us to develop our countries.
Sure, indeed, yeah. Good point to end on that. Thank you, Mr. Mboj. Slave trade remembrance. Now, on to our final story. Subject close to both our hearts, football. Season has just concluded here in the Gambia. I know it's just started in Europe, and you're all watching Premier League, I'm sure. Anyway, in the Gambia, we just ended. Have a look.
The national leagues have come to its climax with Fortune Football Club crowned champions of the male first division, Falcons winning the second division, and Police Ladies winning the female league. In what was a difficult season due to the COVID-19 pandemic, the Football Federation managed to successfully complete the season despite the challenges. Ibu Fai, the second vice president of the Gambia Football Federation, who doubles as the head of all competitions, recalls some memorable events during the 2020-2021 season.
Fortune's winning the league, that's the most eye-catching. Fortune is not one of the usual suspects. And they started the league in the first round. They did extremely well, gathered the necessary points they needed, and then just managed the second round. That shows maybe the maturity of the coach, and also it helps, you know, the players well motivated. In the second division, Falcons also, they did extremely well, and winning the league, you know, even before the league ends, you know, and also the relegation was tough, very, very tough. You know, about 8 teams competing to be relegated, you know, both in the first and second division, it was tough.
Just to correct him there, I'm sure the 8 teams were not competing to be relegated. I think they were competing not to be relegated. Mr. Mboj, we talk about Fortune, and he said they're rightly not one of the usual suspects. I regret the fact that they won the league with 3 matches to spare. And that was quite a surprise, but it's quite a lift, because when they started allowing spectators it absolutely lifted the competition, and they had some of the biggest crowds they've had for years.
Absolutely, the unusual suspect.
Yeah,
we'll call it there. So absolutely, it seems that this new coach they have, well, I think it's been there, Jane Juve, their coach, yes, my former schoolmate at Gambia High School.
Right.
Absolutely. So he seemed to have turned it around. Sure. And then, yes, the wild card, let's get somebody else new to be winning it instead of just having the traditional.
Quite refreshing. Like Leicester winning in England.
Like Leicester winning in England. And we hope that they're here to stay, really to compete every year, for the title. So fantastic.
Sure. And they're now going to the Champions League. First game is against Entente Sétif in Algeria. Quite tough draw for Fortune, but they seem to be making moves, signing, Gambian international, and they seem to be preparing well for it. What would you? Would them getting out of the group stage be beyond a dream?
Baptism of fire.
It really is.
that sort of thing. Let them just go and give it their best.
Sure.
It will be a good experience. Yeah. This is going to be their first time. So just go and give it your best. We know that these things, it takes experience.
Indeed.
It is going to be extremely difficult. Yeah. But once you give a good performance, I think people will appreciate that. And you might get a bonus of winning. You just never know. But just do your game, give a good performance.
And I think it's probably an obvious question, but I think people had missed going to football. And because of COVID restrictions, and so we saw the crowds flocking back, and it was somebody's bright idea to have night games, and they were packed. I couldn't believe it when I saw the crowds at one of the games.
Absolutely, we're a football-loving nation.
Yeah, indeed.
Everybody loves football here, so absolutely. It's just that we should show more interest, as it were. People tend to say we should show more interest in our local football than just concentrating on the Premiership on TV. I mean, yes, it's exciting to watch, good, but again, we can combine both. We should show interest in our clubs as well, instead of just focusing on the Premiership.
Let's not just focus on the Premiership, and that nicely concludes the program. Mr. Mboj, and thank you to our viewers. Thank you for watching. You've been watching the Week in Review, and as I said, I'm your host, Adi Darami, and my co-host, Mr. Mboj, and we're here every week, so join us again next week, but for now, thanks for watching. Goodbye.